Welcome back to the Best Worst Thing podcast. I'm your host, Josh Lewa. My next guest has been a special educator based out of Vermont for 18 years, and her work in supporting youth goes well beyond her professional credentialing. She's a committed parent and supporter in many efforts in the Essex area. She's also the co-founder of a food shelf in the area, which demonstrates her commitment and life to service. And I'm super excited to hear her story. We might even get a special guest, as her daughter may join us a little later. And so that might be a Best Worst Thing podcast for us, but I'm just super excited to speak with you. Welcome, Andrea Francalangia.
Thank you.
I know I butchered your last name, but I'll get it by the time we're done with this recording, which will be too late. But and considering I have the last name Walewa, my full name is Joshua Mukwana Samwini Walewa. You think I can work with the vowels, but I'm a work in progress. But anyway, so thank you for being here, and I appreciate getting connected to you. If you wouldn't mind just for a moment sharing with the listeners a little bit about your current role, both in special education and also to this food shelf. I'm curious to hear about that as well.
Sure. So I've been working in grades 3, 4, and 5 for special education since 2011, so about 10 years. And I provide services for kids with a variety of needs. So some kids have a reading or a math disability, and some kids have emotional disturbance. I'm also working with a student who's considered deaf-blind. So I support the kids to try to provide access to their education.
Excellent. Many years ago in my training, I got certified to teach, and at some point I picked up a teaching assistantship job in a classroom. I think it was a back then I guess they called it behavior disorder classroom. It was a really powerful experience. And, it was interesting later to see some of those kids and how much they shifted and grew so much and changed with a lot of really care and attention. I mean, they just developed and flourished to be these wonderful, young teenagers, and I assume now great adults. And so can you tell me a little bit about, if that's the potential outcome for so many youth, who are dealing with different challenges, how did you get into the field? What was your path to go in that direction?
So I'm the 4th generation teacher in my family. Wow. I grew up, my mom was a teacher, my grandmother, my great-grandmother, and my aunt. And I grew up right when I was young, knew I wanted to be a teacher. I taught all my friends, and I helped out the kids who needed extra help at school. I had some fabulous teachers throughout my schooling, and I've always wanted to be someone that children could look back in their schooling and have a positive memory of me and feel like they were supported and they found somebody who believed in them and helped them achieve some goals that maybe they didn't know they had or didn't know they could reach.
That's great. I remember in one of when I was with the elementary age kids, the little ones, they're so cute, right? They're like 5 and 6, and this was in my teaching certificate program. This group of students who would always come in, some would come in with, maybe a teaching assistant, or, others would come in solo. And, I remember in my time at that school in Hiawatha, Iowa, that I noticed a pattern of attention is attention, whether it's positive, whether it's negative, it's attention. And that these kids were starved for attention. They were already singled out and separated out for so many different reasons. And once I made that shift in my head, I remember some specific experiences and examples of these students really flourishing. I taught art, and so I remember them really flourishing, kind of stepping away from the lead teacher's perspective of, this student is dealing with this particular thing, towards I'm just going to give them, if they want attention, I'll give them attention and it'll be positive. I'm kind of curious about your thoughts about maybe that's oversimplified. That was a 20-year-old, 21-year-old, 22-year-old Josh. But I would love to kind of get the expert perspective on that.
I think that behavior serves a purpose. Kids don't, if a kid is struggling behaviorally, I don't think they make a decision to come into school and say, I'm going to flip a desk. I think that there's always a reason for that behavior. So I like to try to find that reason and try to help the kids see maybe where or why, or start to detect when they could feel that coming on. I think that it's really important to show kids, well, all people, I guess, positive attention, and that there are better ways to get the attention that you need. And so I personally, once I find the function of a behavior, so if it's to get negative attention, then I would actually tend to ignore that behavior for the negative attention and look for a positive and give the attention to the positive behavior to try to help shape their behavior.
Yeah, absolutely. It reminds me of this idea of, when you're dealing with a young person in crisis, the first thoughts that I was trained on was, what are my feelings and emotions right now, just to make sure I'm kind of in tune and that I'm not reacting. And parents can, I'm sure you as a parent, and my son's an adult now, and I've even struggled at points, and he can at least articulate and check me when I'm out of line. But, the first thing is kind of getting my emotions in order to make sure, because, for me as the responsible party, that's important. But then the second question on the check down was, in my training was, what does this person feel, think, need, want, right? It's like, that's really the basis of it. And so if you can address that, you can be a lot more effective versus just reacting out of our emotions, and doing something that has, could potentially be emotionally harmful for the young person. So I definitely appreciate that.
Well, and there's so much that we don't understand around behavior. I did my master's program and I did my thesis on domestic violence and the impact on children. Really, it's a form of trauma, and trauma on children is so huge. But there are things, I used an example that if a child was sitting down at a table and a teacher walked quickly up to them to, take something, that could trigger something inside the child that's a memory or a traumatic experience, that child is no longer present in the school. And whatever behavior is an outcome of that, we really don't have control, because we maybe didn't understand that just a simple moving quickly towards that child caused some type of body response to that.
Yeah. It's really interesting for us, who are anybody who's working with a wide range of audiences. I think sometimes it's tempting to get so ego focused on kind of, how I'm feeling and how I'm reacting, and not really considering that person's, even at such young ages, these children are bringing a lot with them. Even my college students that I work with are bringing a lot with them, and something as simple as what could be perceived as an aggressive gesture or fast movement could really bring up some things for people. And to be attentive to that is really important. So, I'm going to switch gears here a little bit, because, I really appreciate the work you're doing, but I also want to know about this food shelf. How did you get involved in that whole process?
Well, I'm somebody who has the type of personality that I don't like to say no, and I try to save everything. And so years ago, I received an email that there was a food shelf meeting, and I actually thought it was a meeting for a food shelf that was opening in Essex. So I thought I was going to start to help volunteer. And the meeting I attended was a meeting to develop a board and create this food shelf in our community that when I first started teaching here, it was, we had very low poverty in our community. And one of our big businesses had to do quite a few layoffs, and it's really, turned. So there's more need. So anyway, I was at that meeting, and in creating the board, I was appointed president. And I came home and I told my husband, well, I'm the president of this new food shelf, and we had to create a name so that we could try to find a place to have this food shelf. So we came up with a name called Aunt Dot's Place. We wanted it to sound comforting and warm and not be we don't want it to be demeaning to people who had to go there anyway. We wanted people to feel comfortable and good about going there. So it took us about 2 years until we finally got a space open and got it open. But now our it's doing amazing. When we first opened, we were lucky if we had 10 clients come in a 2-hour shift. And now we serve 20, sometimes more in a 2-hour shift. So it's wonderful.
That is amazing. Aunt Dot's Place. That sounds like a place that I feel comfortable going to.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about what made you decide to go into education in the first place, and what was your career path towards education?
Yeah, I went right from high school to college, and I graduated as a double major in elementary education and English. And I was hired immediately at the school I did my student teaching at. So I started working at that school for that district in 2003, and I'm still with that district. In 2011, I did the coursework to get the special education endorsement so I could be a special educator. So I hold a license for elementary education and special education. And 2 years ago, I completed my master's program.
Congratulations.
Thanks.
It's so interesting. You've been in environments for such a long time, and we live in a world now where people, kind of, me included, shift, every few years, every, 3 to 5 years, you're itching for a new opportunity, new location, new responsibility. Can you tell me a little bit about what's helped you stay kind of committed to that area and to being an educator committed for a good amount of time?
Yeah, I grew up here, and I thrive with schedule and predictability, and I'm not a huge fan of change. I love my job. I love the kids, and I love the people I work with. I am a very social person, so I create pretty strong relationships, I think, with people. And I want to be by my friends and family. I'm very family oriented. And so I never really wanted to move to a different place. And now I've been here for so long, I don't know that I could start over somewhere.
Yeah, I personally connect with that. I just, even though I grew up somewhere else, I've been in St. Louis for a long time, and always wonder what's the next place that I'm going to end up in USA. And as time goes by, that's a scary consideration of starting over. It's almost like I have to have friends associated in a particular area, or at least be within a short flight or a road trip to see people. So, you talked a little bit about your being a 4th generation teacher and growing up in the area. I'd love to know a little bit more about kind of the area you grew up, if you can kind of describe it, and your family background, and maybe tell us a little bit about your family or whatever else you feel comfortable sharing.
Yeah, sure. So I grew up in St. Albans, which is about 30 miles north of here. It's, I think it's like an hour from St. Albans to Montreal, pretty close to the Canadian border. And it was a pretty small town, actually. And I went to the school my mom taught at. I lived with my mom and my older sister. My parents were divorced, but my dad still lived in the same town. So I would visit him, or he would visit us often. And my grandparents lived in Essex, and where I live now. And this is where my mom went to school. And I ended up in this area just because it's where my student teacher placement was. And so all my family, most of my family was in the area. My dad's family came over. My grandmother immigrated from Greece. And so she was living in Massachusetts and my uncle, but the majority of my family was right here in Vermont.
It's interesting with the immigrant background and the family that's kind of settled in an area, but I'm kind of curious about this because I notice a pattern with some people, that even if they're not in the exact field that a parent was in, there's this strong influence. And you're a fourth generation, you have 3 generations ahead of you. And so I'm kind of curious about maybe even if you could share a little bit about, those women and their work in education. I'm just so curious about that.
Yeah. My mom was a second grade teacher for 34 years before she passed away. And her sister was a high school teacher through her that was her career. She taught high school English. My grandmother was an elementary school teacher, and she actually taught at the school my daughter goes to now.
Wow.
One of my colleagues, when I first started working, had found an old record, and my grandmother's annual salary was like $1,000. He had found the teacher records, and he's like, "This was your grandmother." And then my grandmother's mother was a high school history teacher.
Wow. Well, that's a pretty deep roster going back into education.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. So, this maybe just be more of a personal curiosity because the young people that you're working with are going down the pike, and eventually some of them will end up in higher institutions like the one I work in. And so I'm kind of curious about, now that you've had a pretty good amount of time. I mean, we won't count the generations before you. We'll just talk about your experiences. Are there things that you notice about students changing, any profiles, any characteristics? I know these young people these days are growing up. I mean, we study Generation Z who are into our college and graduate programs now, who were exposed to social media for such a long time. We talk about the millennials before them, who grew up with a lot of technology, but these new generations are bombarded with access to information and news and so many other things, and it's really impacting them in some interesting ways. And I don't know if you've, just from a practitioner's perspective, have seen, noticed an evolution or a shift in students over the years.
I think that kids know everything there now. There doesn't seem to be a filter. If something happens, we had an incident that happened at the mall a few months ago, and a friend said, my high school daughter told me about it before, he even was aware of it. And I just think, I don't know if it's making kids grow up too fast in some ways, but struggle socially in other ways. Sometimes it can be hard for kids to have a conversation on the phone. They'd rather just text the person, or there's definitely some concerns around social media and the way that others can treat each other through social media. And I think there were always, when I was growing up or even working with children when I first started before social media, there's always going to be some kids who are mean, but it just seems like maybe it's easier to be mean now with social media. Kids are scared when they leave our building. They're going to a middle school in 6th grade. It's a 6th, 7th, and 8th grade building. And kids are scared to go there because it's just, things change. When I go over there and I see a kid that I had worked with in 5th grade, I'm like, who are you? I can't even recognize them sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember visiting the middle school my son was going to go to and seeing how big some of those 8th graders were and thinking like, those are like teenagers. How's my little kid going to transition, and be around these people? But I also agree with you with access to social media. I know we've talked about bullying for quite a bit of time now, but whether people are doing it anonymously or or otherwise, that our young people are really being impacted. And it's one of the challenges that, me and my colleagues face and maybe even challenge each other around, which is every generation has different challenges. I don't want to say one's worse or better, but I know that they're different. Mm-hmm. And, the young people who are coming up right now have a unique set of challenges that we didn't. Maybe we were latchkey kids, or maybe, there are certain things going on in the world that are pretty significant and scary and traumatizing, to use that word again. But these young people are growing up and developing in such a very different way. And I guess, my call to myself and challenge to myself and to people who are working with young people in the career space or in education is not to do a comparative, but just to accept that these kids are having a whole new set of challenges that we will never understand because we didn't have to go through it. We didn't have to go through bullying we had to go through bullying in a very different way, but they go home and they can be bullied right from their laptop or from their cell phone. Right. And the answer is not always just take the cell phone away, right? Like, people can access information anywhere. And then also too, they have this constant stream of bad information or news or negative things that are happening. I think we're looking at some of the research now that there are some negative outcomes and impact to young people in their development, including the development of their brain with this constant bombardment of information. So, I really do think, as I watch Generation Xers make fun of millennials, and I can imagine millennials will start, taking the shots at Gen Zs, that across the generations, that we just create more empathy for these young folks, because again, we don't know what happened before us, and we don't know how other people behind us are experiencing the world, but we know that it's different and it's legit. Like, it's, they call us the slackers, my generation. And I think, well, you had a very different experience than I did growing up, and again, so for my generation to do with the upcoming generations doesn't seem like a good move. I think I would propose, a world more of empathy, and even if you don't understand, just a world of empathy.
Mm-hmm. With that said, though, with the quick access to so much information, it is bringing awareness to things that maybe kids wouldn't have been so aware about, like good things, positive change. I think it's also, while there's some definite negatives about it, there are some positives that it's providing kids the ability to be more aware of their world and what's going on outside of their town.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Andrea. We were reading an article online for a part of a team discussion with some faculty and staff, and one of the characteristics about this upcoming college Generation Z is their openness to inclusivity and diversity, and having more of a stake in that, because of course the world is small to them. They know people who don't look like them or who aren't exactly like them, and even if they don't know that, they're having more interactions around the globe with people who are different from them. And I would argue and agree with you that that's a positive outcome of what could look like a very negative excess issue.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate it. So we're going to take a small break, and then we're going to get into the big question.
Okay.
So as you know, this podcast is called The Best Worst Thing. And if this is the first time you've listened to an episode, or if this is the 27th time you've listened, this is a time where our guests share a personal or professional example of an experience they had that was difficult, or maybe a setback or a challenge. And so the questions are, what happened? How did you kind of endure and work through it? And what were some lessons that you learned that you, through enduring that experience, that you want the listeners to know? So Andrea, what is your best worst thing?
So we became licensed foster parents. We just got our license. We had talked about it after my daughter was born, that we wanted to do it. I was more like, yes, we want to do this. And my husband was like, okay, he's a computer engineer. So he it was like, one kid's great. And we went into it with the intent to foster, to adopt. We've only fostered one child so far, and that child, we knew it was going to be temporary. So it was good that it was our first experience. And we had originally wanted someone younger than our daughter, but this was an 11-year-old child coming to our home, which is the age that I work mostly with. So we had her for about 4 months from October, and she left at the end of February. So it was fabulous because she's a great kid, and we just grew to love her so much. The worst part was having to say goodbye. That was really hard. Even though our goodbye was for her to have good things happen, I didn't realize how hard it would be to have that goodbye happen.
Yeah. Let's talk about that because, it's interesting that some people think it takes years to develop close bonds and relationships with people. And you had 4 months.
Yeah. Well, 4 months during COVID, right? So we couldn't really do much. We're home. We spent a lot of time together. And she just, I said at the beginning, I'm a creature of habit, and I'm very rigid with my schedule. So it was an adjustment period for me to change and modify, but I did. We all did. And she just fit really well into our family. And she was so wonderful with my daughter. Sophia is my daughter, and she calls her big sister, and just loves her so much.
Yeah, I guess COVID months are like dog years. Mm-hmm. Some intensity, over those 4 months. And so how is Sophia doing with the shift and the change?
She's doing well. She's doing well. We got a cat. Okay. So we didn't have a pet, and Sophia wanted a pet. And I was like, well, now's a good time to, maybe get that pet. And she's done great. She's been taking care of her and helpful with that. And they stay in contact. So that was really nice that we have the opportunity to stay in contact with the kiddo. So she will FaceTime her sometimes a lot. We have to make sure she doesn't sneak the phone. And they text each other and stay in contact. And that's been really helpful. And I think the hope is she'll come up, I believe, this summer to Vermont to go to a camp. So I'm hoping we get to see her.
Yeah. This makes me think about, I might have said this in another episode, so I apologize, but this idea of there's a cost to everything, right? So there's this saying out there, a quote, the cost of, love is loss.
Yeah.
And so I'm I can imagine having this really intense relationship. I don't know if you anticipated that you were going to, really connect so much with this young person, but in the end, they go on to a better situation and they're not there anymore. And I'm sure plenty of foster families have this experience. I'm kind of curious from you, was it worth it? Is it worth it for you to have that experience, even though you have to endure this sense of potentially losing, and even if it's to a better thing or a better situation, separating and closing a relationship like this?
Yeah, it is. I would say it absolutely is worth it. And it's worth it for more than just me and my husband and my daughter and the kiddo, but it's worth it for helping others in the future. I have my niece and nephew now, when they play dolls, they always have a foster kid, and they talk about when they're older, they want to foster. And I just think the more that we all can help, we could really provide a better world. And honestly, if you think about it, everybody dies. So you're always going to have to say a hard goodbye. Yep. And while they're not fun, nobody gets, I think, overly excited about a hard goodbye. I guess I'd feel selfish if I didn't want to do it again because the goodbye was hard.
Yeah.
Because I think that our 4 months together was so much more meaningful. I think that we learned so much from each other and grew so much as a family that it was definitely worth it.
Yeah, I agree. I often think taking a safe route. I could be a hermit and recluse and avoid hurt and damage and avoid things, but it's not much of a life there. And so the idea of being out there and caring for people and developing a relationship, to me, I would choose that 10 times out of 10, even if I have to pay the price. And like you said, one day some people are I'll be gone and somebody will be dealing with that. And so it's a part of this life experience. And so I can really appreciate that. So we're getting ready to wrap up here, but I do want to elevate Aunt Dot's place. And so I know, we have listeners from all over the country and so is there a way that people can can donate, or what's the best way to do that or to get involved? What would you like to share about that?
Yeah, sure. We have a website. It's auntdotsplace.com. It's all one word. And we have a Facebook page, Aunt Dot's Place. And we've received food donations from like an Amazon snack pack that have shown up and we don't know who sent them. We take PayPal and monetary donations, and we're always looking for volunteers, especially right now. The majority of our volunteers were older folks, and so they hadn't really been able to volunteer because of COVID. Yep. And so volunteers were 100% volunteer run. We have no paid staff. And we rely on donations of food and money to keep us running.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I want to encourage our listeners to make sure that you check out auntdotsplace.com or Aunt Dot's Place on Facebook and find a way to give and to get involved. And I appreciate your effort in doing that. And and thank you for doing the work you do in the education system. I look forward to seeing some of those young people cross my path in the higher education system as well.
Yeah, thank you so much for this opportunity.
You're welcome. Thank you for listening to the Best Worst podcast. I'm your host, Josh Willewa. Music is produced by Josh One. You can follow him at Boomnote on Instagram and Twitter, and Josh One on Spotify. Our episodes are edited by Cool Jets Audio and Visual. You can follow them at Cool Jets AV on Instagram. Our marketing is designed by Francesca Daniels. You can find her at FrankandKitty24 on Instagram. And our overall design is by Inspired Design with Ryan Daniels. You can find them at getinspired.design on Instagram. Thank you for listening to the Best Worst Thing.
Trailblazer, main face your optics. I rock this, cops this, blaze your boombox. The cool Cali kid from the boondocks. Bounce to your hood like chocolate with a crime on. Independent thing to play a beat, I get my rhyme on. So when I strut on a path to perfection, city to your borough, to your town, to your streets. Keep your party live, Josh One got beats out of nature. Grazer, Oakland, strays to Asia. It's like Fraser, force of Fantasia. Move through your suburbs.